Okay, for this one, we're going to go into why open borders is the only constitutional system. And first of all, we have to explain the basically the different types of border patrol type of systems. First of all, you're going to have open borders, you can have closed borders, or you can have a semi-open border system. Now, basically, I'll go into what type of system that we currently have. I'll show you why it's a multi-tiered system, depending on where you actually enter, and why it's actually really odd, and why it really doesn't make sense why we have it. And I'll show you what exactly each one means and why there's actually a lot of lies spread about what they actually mean. First of all, let's go over what's a lot of these restrictionists are asking for, which is what is called closed borders. Now, no country since I would probably say the Soviet Union has ever used closed borders. Even your Marxist countries don't use it because it means certain death. And there's a reason why. Closed borders means nobody comes in, uh, nobody goes out. No goods come in and no goods go out. That's what closed borders means. And you have a lot of immigration restrictionists that support this. You have people that claim they support entrepreneurs that support this. You'll have like the Proud Boys. They say this, they support this, yet they support entrepreneurs, which makes completely no sense. You'll have other groups that say they support this. You've had some people like in media, like at Breitbart and other groups like this. They support this. Um, you have people like these restrictionist immigration think tanks and groups with it, like at FAIR or Numbers, which and their subgroup Numbers USA support this. You have people like Stephen Miller support this. There was Trump's immigration kind of czar, or if you want to call it uh, whatever you want to call that type of position. So basically, what you had with it was this is basically what the types of people you have supporting it, but they don't even understand what it actually means. Now, closed borders essentially is, as we stated, nothing goes in, nothing goes out. Everything is completely closed. This means basically is the whole supply of everything is you need a fully self-sustaining system. Now, if you've understood anything about the American society for minimum the last 200 years, is we've solely relied upon foreign goods. And minimum with it, I mean, if not from the actual start, because I mean, a lot of our early goods with it were actually shipped in from Britain itself. And you have to understand that we don't have the ability that's going back to the earliest settlers. So I mean, you have to understand that we don't even have the ability, we've never had the ability to actually do this. We've actually had relations with other countries since the start, and we've never gone with the ability just to basically trade and develop things within the actual country itself and leave it to only that, because even though it is possible, it is not very prosperous, because there's a lot of supplies that we actually use on a regular basis that can't be made. And if we were to try to do it, it would be a miserable failure. Let's take, for instance, ideas, and we'd have to basically stop all of our subsidies into things, and it would be basically catastrophic. Um, you would basically, for once, with it, take the first thing, like let's say for the ideas of petroleum, all the petroleum we use with it. Now you have the petroleum byproducts would end up going well up in price, because obviously that we don't have access to other sources. We also we because we're obviously dealing with ones that are actually being processed under the wage laws and a lot of unions and things like this that are under US, the US, which is highly inflated. And this costs a lot more money. And actually, uh, what we found with it is obviously shale gas actually costs more money to actually produce than it actually is worth. And this is one of the things they actually found out about it. And this is when they thought it was some type of miracle, it actually wasn't. It actually was some kind of failure. And they actually found out that it only works when the price is astronomically high. When the price is basically above like over $100 a barrel, it works just fine. But when the price is like under like $70 a barrel, it actually becomes a miserable failure. And you can't always guarantee the price is going to be above $100 a barrel for it to be actually functional. And this is one of the major things. That means you don't have access to that. That means you have to do petroleum in the normal way, and that means we have very, very limited resources, or we have to pay astronomical prices. And that means you can expect basically prices to be astronomically high throughout the United States. And they, so it means the one solution would be actually going around and actually you could reduce state and the state, local, and federal taxes on gas to accommodate to, but then you're talking that that's supposed to generate some type of tax revenue in which is collected. Now, then you'd have to actually adjust the actual government and what they're actually doing, and this this would cause massive damages to the actual uh, way that they're collecting, and they would have to start cutting services. Now, now we have the actual companies. Now, not many companies are going to say because they're essentially going to notice they're going to have a limited amount of people that they can work with. They will be essentially penalized for uh, uh, dealing with any outsourcing for any even part of their business. This is what a closed border society would do to basically try to keep as much revenue inside the company. So what's going to happen is those companies are going to leave, and you're not going to be dealing with many companies within the system. And you're not going to be able to lure in companies because obviously that would be bringing in things. You can't bring in any component parts because those are because of the closed borders. You can't bring in any food that's closed because of the closed borders. When we're talking like such things as coffee, coffee can't come in because the fact is you only have one option. That's coffee coming in from Hawaii. Now you have the basics of supply and demand show that if you're only using coffee from Hawaii and you don't have the competing coffee from coming from many other nations such as Colombia, Colombia, Jamaica, Peru, amongst other nations, you don't have access, and even areas of Africa as well. You don't have you don't have any of these options. What ends up happening is that the price of coffee goes through the roof because instead of having all of these supply areas that you would normally have, you're now cutting it down to basically one area, and you have now a population of over 330 million people that are competing for it when it was normally a smaller population that was going for it because now there is no substitution. Formerly there was a substitution, and that was merely that Kona coffee was acting as a substitution for a lot of the coffee coming from Central and South America. Now that it's actually not, now there's no substitution, is it acts as the only primary thing, and that's the only one you can get, and basically this is going to jack up the price. You can see, and being it's a limited area, and that coffee is considered a massive staple, it's going to jack up the price to astronomical levels because there's only so much area that they can grow the coffee. Now they could probably expand that, but then you're talking that could possibly be in areas in which macadamia nuts are grown, in which are also another staple. And this would cause massive problems for that, for those who want to get access to macadamia nuts. That means they can't get access to those. And then we have, uh, or you'd have like the government trying to subsidize it, trying to reduce the cost, and then you have massive government debt, which causes inflation, and that's going to basically cause basically where you continue on to a pretty much a countrywide failure where the actual system completely breaks down. And if you think the situation out in Venezuela is bad, this would be breaking down far faster. And because the fact is at least they have access to the main commodity of oil, and to actually, and they don't have they're not dealing with the massive consumption rate as the United States. That's the whole difference. And they actually slowed down by going through nationalism, and then they went to socialism. They went to the first stupid idea, then they went through another, and then they went through another stupid idea. And that was the whole point with it. And they never fully closed on borders. They never did that. They did they essentially went through a semi-closed border of just limiting certain things, and limiting from certain countries as well. And that's what occurs on a closed border system. Closed border systems is basically you're asking for complete and utter failure. And even beyond the fact of when it comes down to immigrants create three times the amount of jobs as your as citizens on for your Main Street businesses, even throwing that fact out, even being the fact that you're not going to get any jobs coming about, this is basically a fact of where you're going to have complete and utter failure, where it's going to be failing in so many other areas with it where the economics just doesn't work. Now you go into the idea of semi open borders. This basically means that this is pretty much the way we go with, and if you're looking for I deal with this next one, the semi-open borders. This is the way we go with our southern border with Mexico. We allow certain things in. Uh, we basically allow certain people in, but you have to go through kind of a system to where it's like you have to go through a lot of extra either paperwork, or for people you have to go through a visa process, and this can be very difficult. This is more added bureaucracy than it's really necessary, and I'll show you why in the end. And when it comes down to getting contraband into the country with it, they still can get through with it. In fact, this actually makes it a lot easier than open borders, and I'll show you why. Because because when we start to look at, if you look at this, compare this to, and I'll show you, compare it to an open border area. Then if you compare, and you'll find out why very easily. And when we start to look at this, you'll see that basically it just you're just basically creating a larger bureaucracy, and it doesn't really do much. But what it does is basically creates pretty much a permanent bureaucracy and making arbitrary decisions. Now, what this does is this basically harms the flow of both people and business goods, and it harms the actual production of business, and harms the flow of people going back and forth. Now, mind you, that I said back and forth. This is not, when we look at the obvious idea of borders, we need to understand it's not just one way, it's both ways. And the best way to explain this is obviously looking at a prison. Because when you look at a prison, prisons don't construct walls to keep people from breaking in. They keep them from people from breaking out. And this is really where a lot of these walls and such end up being far more effective. They're not really effective from keeping people from breaking in. They're effective from keeping people from breaking out. It's to keep the flow of actual. What ends up doing is it keeps the flow of business from coming in, and of like goods from coming in. It's supposed to slow down the goods from coming in and the people from coming out, from leaving, and basically staying gone for too long, so they can actually check on them. It doesn't actually do anything. It does nothing when it comes down to illegal immigration through contraband or anything like this. It's actually very, very poor. If you want a poor system with it, this is what you want. In fact, the only thing that could be any worse is when we're talking is just a completely unchecked border with no security, which is not the same thing as open borders, as we'll get to in a minute. This is the rumor of what they want to claim open borders is, and this is not what open borders is. In fact, with it, there's many countries around the world that actually have open borders. Now, if you compare this to now, this is essentially what ends up happening there with it. Now, the next one we want to go over is what is called open borders. Now, open borders is what we actually have on our northern border. Now, people might go, "We have open borders." Yes, we have open borders on our northern border, and there's actually a reason why. If people say they don't want Mexicans here, well, it doesn't work that way. Very, very easy. Any Mexican that actually, if you realize with it, the cost of a coyote to sneak you across the southern border is actually far more expensive than the price of a passport, the price of a plane flight to Canada, and walking right across the border with your border card, with actually your passport card. Most people don't understand that all you need is a passport card to get across, and they can get right across that border. I go, well, why don't they need a visa? Well, because all they need is that passport card, and guess what? They can get right across with. They go, well, why don't they do it on the southern border? Well, because the southern border actually has different rules, and for people that are actually worried about, oh my God, they're going to come right across, and all the other fake things with it to come through with that. Well, guess what? They can come right across on the northern border, and frankly, as long as they represent no security threats, they basically no security and no health. As long as they go through their health check and get on that plane, they go fly right over to Canada. Canada, as already stated, they have no problem with them flying over. They go down to Mexico City. They fly over to an area like Montreal or Toronto, fly over there with it. They go, they basically take whatever type of service, they go right across, boom, they're in the United States. So, frankly, with it, that's far easier for them to get in. Now, obviously, they'd be limited with the amount of time with it, but as we know, the biggest amount of illegal immigrants in the United States is actually visa overstays. And basically, this is where the actual problem is coming from, is the visa overstays. So we know the visa system doesn't work. This means that basically what we need to do is we need to realize that basically our system is a complete and utter failure. So the semi-open border system is basically a joke. That means basically when you go into the that means when you go into the last one, which will go into its the way we're going through with flights and with our shipping. Now, this one is a real big schizophrenic one. if you end up being some type of diplomat or some type of preferred country area with it, you can come over and don't even have to come up to the standard of a to open borders. This is below open borders. This is basically what this is no security check. Come right through. These are people who are even dangerous to areas that are dangerous to our country, including Israel and Saudi Arabia. Israel has even brought over serial killers into our country. You can actually look up with it. You can actually look up several serial killers that have, a few different serial killers that have actually come over from Israel, have actually killed people here, gone right back, and when we ask for them to extradite them back to the United States, they basically give us the middle finger, and that's basically what they're doing. And yet we claim them to be an ally. That's why if you hear from anybody that says, "Oh, Israel's an ally," they're actually kind of full of BS. I don't care. I don't care what ideology they are. If you ever hear them say that with it, they're actually on that topic. They're full of BS because, frankly, this is a country who even fails to extradite people that are actually guilty of homicide. They won't even let them stand trial to with people with it when there's actually full forensic evidence. We've been willing to actually show them right to their face full forensic evidence. Even states, and if they're concerned about the death penalty, these have even been states that have actually abolished the death penalty long ago. So it's not like it's states that they're concerned about the death penalty. We've even had situations to where Saudi Arabia's brought over brought over people that have committed acts of terror, and basically through this whole system of where there's no actual security checks, and lo and behold, with it, we're left with a big pile of dead bodies because of this. And that's basically lower than the standard of open borders. There's no security check whatsoever, and in which these people would have been rejected because of what they had full intention of doing. And yet the government just lets them pass right through because of who they're linked to. And we also have our visa waiver program, which basically allows them as long as this pretty much gives certain specialized countries access to essentially open borders through air. Yet this is not afforded to all countries with it, and this is based solely on income. When that's really uh, when they state it's supposed to be based on security, but if you look at the thing, it's merely only based on income, and it's not based on any other factor. And income of an actual nation, of the actual people with it compared to the United States, is an irrelevant factor. That does not necessarily lead to a security threat. That's not what a security threat is. Income is not determined to a security threat. You can have people who make a lot of money uh, as a country that are that are actually big security threats. I mean, there's countries in the Middle East that are actually serious security threats, but are very, very wealthy. There's actually countries that are actually very poor that represent no security threats. And that's what we need to realize. And this is the actual point. That's actually something very, very important that needs to be discussed. And this is something which is a very important factor, is that security is not a monetary issue. And there's also how does the actual monetary amount to the individuals compare to the actual state? Because not all monetary amounts are even. Because it could be a state that's actually very, very wealthy, but because of the cost of living, that amount that they have with it doesn't mean anything. And yet you can have a person that's not as wealthy that's gonna come here with it. I really had that person coming from the other country that's not as wealthy, because they come here with it. They go, oh, but they can come here and work. That's a problem. That should be the actual thing you want, because we've actually looked at income amount. If you look at actually data from actual countries, when they're coming here with it, there's a lot of countries from that are even on that list from Northern Europe. They come here and they're actually making less money than they were in their actual home country. Frankly, that means they're not even working as hard here. They're actually working less as they're actually working less. They're actually not as working as hard in the United States as they were in their home countries. This is actually a huge problem. Yeah, you got people who are actually coming from poorer countries who many times where they're making are making several different times. I mean, one example with it, I mean, you'll find people from like Norway that are actually that they're making about 80% of what they're making here in the United States. Uh, in the United States, they're making about 80% of what they make out there. Now, that should mean that they're not a good investment when they come here. You look at people out in the Philippines, and you're talking, they're making many times. I think I figured it was like 13 and a half times their amount of the average income. That's a person who basically, when they get here, they're busting their backsides and they're earning a lot of money. In fact, Filipinos are actually one of the five highest earners in the amongst immigrant groups, far higher than Americans. We're talking about 1.5 times of what the average American earns. We're talking they are far wealthier than Americans, and that's going on per capita. If you go on the average American, going on the median American with it, you're talking it's like 3 times the amount. And so it ends up showing that they are far better to actually have here. Yet we do not yet we make them jump through hoops to come here. Frankly, we should be saying that they should be coming here in droves. And another thing with it when we start to look at is on immigration is usually traditionally you want to reciprocate on the thing. We're not even reciprocating on any of these countries that we're allowed to visit. We're allowed to visit there with basically with virtually no with basically equal to an open border system, as most of these countries they want tourism. Yet when it comes down to the United States, is it's not reciprocated. We basically set a standard to where they can't come in. We can go there, but they can't come here. Well, if you want to basically create, and we're one, and economically, we've wondered why we have this trade deficit. One of the biggest problems of a trade deficit is where you can earn money is through tourism. When you basically are having all of these other countries that are basically essentially having a tour, Americans are visiting them, but they're not. We're not allowing them to visit us. This is going to create a massive deficit just naturally. That's the biggest source. That's going to be one of your biggest sources of deficits. One of our biggest industries is the hospitality and tourism industry. You're going to be taking a massive hit if you're not allowing anybody but a few different countries to visit the United States without jumping through hoops. And this is going to hurt the actual industry. And that's why when we start to look at this, we start to look at that, we start to see that that's a problem with it. And we see that there's basically multiple tiers, even on the shipping. Shipping just depends on what country is coming from. If it's a sanctioned country, they pretty much would have to essentially ship the item to another country that's not sanctioned, have it unboxed, reshipped back out here. I know that's technically, and hope that it doesn't get busted as being illegal. And to get into the United States, and just hope that it doesn't get busted because it's a point of origin, and hope and that's trying to get the thing into the United States. Now, if it were basically a now, then there's certain countries in which the United States wants to put tariffs on, and those ones with it end up getting both stalled and as well as they get their items more scrutinized when they're coming into the United States. Then there's other countries which don't get prioritized, in which they get their items stalled but not necessarily tariffed, And then you had the last one, which is other ones that get their items prioritized. And this can cause huge problems, basically, meaning depending on who you deal with as a country, can depend on when you get your products and when you're getting your products into your country, into the United States, your business, and this harms a lot of things. And you can get a lot of delay that's unnecessary. And this is just what ends up happening. And then we start to look at now we need to look at what actually the Constitution says on immigration and naturalization. Now, naturalization, it basically gives them the power over naturalization, which is basically someone coming in that wants to become a citizen. This allows them to set the standard. The current standard is actually 3 years from the time of basically applying for what would be the green card with it or whatever standard that is being set currently for whatever time they're labeled as a resident, from the point of being a resident to the point of being a citizen. There must be a 3 year passage, and they must pass civics test and I believe an English test. I don't know how constitutional on the English test it is. I know in certain areas they've tried to make it questionable on that, but basically that's the point there. And this is basically after 3 years. That's the point, and then obviously you have to take an oath to the country. Then you have the next one, which is uh, going over immigration. Now, what most people don't realize is the word immigration does not appear, or anything referring to it does not appear in the Constitution. There is no constitutional authority. This has been basically an implied power that actually goes through the uh, point of it going through the Commerce Clause. Now, anybody who would take even the slightest knowledge on it would understand that the most narrow concept of the Commerce Clause is that states cannot charge one another tariffs nor taxes for goods passing from one point to the next. The other point is that state is it even in the most wide spanning thing is that the Commerce Clause is only meant to cover goods and services. Now, the thing is with it is, if we start to look at, we know that basically is that people are not goods and services. This is the whole point, and that's the whole point of it. And when we start to look at the whole thing, is that you'll find out that you'll end up finding out that basically is that where we start to read the let me see where the amendment is. is it ends up going on. I believe the 15th Amendment is is basically going over and stating that they basically eliminating the idea of involuntary servitude. Uh, and this would essentially go over the whole point and state that uh, that uh, this means they could not theoretically be considered as either a product or a service as a human being. They would theoretically have to be understood as being a free individual, as per the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence does not was previous to the founding of the nation and would be assigned to any uh, showing as any free individual, and this would have essentially be declared as anybody like that. That means if we understand that to apply to anyone, we that is not committed a crime that would infringe that would basically cause an infringement to their freedom. This means, which means basically something which would cause them to be jailed. This would mean that basically they retain those full freedoms to do what they would want. That they must retain life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It does not. It specifically does not state anything in which we find that they are a person that has a that end up having that they're less of a right to the any of those things. They do not lose life, liberty, or the pursuit of happiness if they have not committed a crime. And as we see that there is no constitutional authority over immigration, as you'll see that immigration is not even mentioned. In fact, the terms even in migration are actually mentioned by John Jay in many early writings to refer to the movement of slaves for sale. They had to use this basically because it would have been a it would have been a clear violation of the Declaration of Independence, because he knew that they were human beings, and it would so they had to use the term migration. He knew that they had to use the term migration to avoid these problems. And when we start to see this, this is something in which we view it in such a way that it's impossible to it's impossible to understand the whole scope of it without understanding that first. That means there is no constitutional authority over this. The idea of this implied power was basically only done because of protectionism. And they did it basically under false pretenses of saying that foreigners will bring in diseases and these other so-called outmoded ideas. And this was this is the idea of where it originally came from. Now, it originally came from under the progressive movement. Now, if we start to actually reject this, as we should, we end up coming with the idea that immigration is not under the scope of the federal government. Now, can it be under the scope of the states? Well, since you cannot actually prevent people from crossing from state to state, since that would be, if someone's deemed a resident, that would not be deemed as lawful. If one state deemed you a resident, with another state could not basically deem you a criminal just for merely crossing through. And this is the whole point with because you do not they're not individually autonomous nations. They basically there's this they follow the same common law with it, where basically where just because you are a citizen, does you're not arrested merely for crossing through. Just like basically you cannot basically in the state of Texas cannot make a law saying, all blacks from Alabama are automatically considered illegal and cannot cross into, like, let's say, New Mexico. They can't do that. If any blacks from Alabama with it are caught in their state with it, they'll automatically arrest them. They can't do it. That's illegal. That would be essentially a violation because there's certain what it called there's certain rights that we end up getting with it, and essentially it would be a violation of the Commerce Clause, in which basically you're essentially not in which all the states are supposed to allow full passage through. That is another thing that is essentially supposed to be allowed. You're not each state is not supposed to basically set their own rules of what you need for passage through. Obviously, you can set tolls for things like this for roads, but you cannot basically start setting uh, penalties for essentially trying to pass through with such things, such other things that one might declare as like a contraband, one might not. And this is where things end up getting to being a point of it, and that's why there's certain national rules on these things. And so you wouldn't be able to do these things on a state level. That's why that they would not be able to set these standards, and nor would they do it at a local level with because the local level could not essentially set their own immigration level just as much as the state could not, unless the state was actually violating the standard of it, in which you were just merely upholding that. Like, let's say you're going to uphold the actual standard of what uh, because there's no standard for immigration on a federal scale with it. If you were going to uphold it in your city with it, you'd be free to do that with it because you're merely just doing the federal constitutional act. All you're doing is upholding the federal law per the Constitution, and you're actually doing that because the actual your both your state government and your federal government are actually violating the Constitution. That would be the lawful way to do it because you're actually merely just following the Constitution as written, and that's something completely different. Now, when we start to go with the ideas of where this starts to go, is that when we start to view it with it now, this is where the point with it where it needs to actually be argued in front of the court. Now, why nobody wants to argue this is I think that both Democrats and Republicans actually have an actual argument against it because on the free movement of people, mind you, that both parties actually spend a lot of money in taxation. And once you allow for the free movement of people, this causes a huge problem because essentially what you're stating is that somebody could essentially be gone without uh, without being demanded that they move to at least another port with it within this time, and that they don't have to follow these guidelines given by the State Department. They can go wherever they want, and there is no when we start to view the free movement of people, you're going to state that they're no longer guided by the ideas of which they're demanded that they have to stay in one specific area, and this is the whole point. And once we start to view this, you start to view that they would be free individuals to do what they want, not basically demanded to be in one specific uh, one specific area with it, and then have to go to another one and basically demand. And if they didn't, they have to return within 90 days on let's say a visitor system where basically like let's say a regular passport where they have to return to their own to the country within 90 days. Now that there is, uh, now to go with the other thing on respecting people as being able to have free movement, this would essentially be stating that they are their own owners and the state does not own them. And this is the whole point of why we defend the idea of open borders and why the actual founders did is because they felt that you were your own owner. And this was not something that the actual current neither Democrat nor Republican Party believe in. Now, the Republican Party feels that they want to basically keep people out who they feel are different than them because obviously we have basically a lot of pandering. We have money being pumped in from these restrictionists as well with it. We've had a lot of people putting basically ads that are basically attacking immigrants with it, which immigrants just don't vote for them then. And we have on the other side with it, they want to spend a lot of money. Well, now both sides, obviously, both sides do want to spend a lot of money, and they're not going to get that without it. And obviously, when you start doing this, it ends up basically changing on how the function goes. Now, you would have to take the money out of more general funds for Border Patrol and not from actually from uh, visa processing. This would no longer go into that. You can no longer demand that they go to a specific place for their health checks. It would be wherever they wanted to go to actually get their health check verification, as long as it was obviously a real hospital or a real clinic or something like this. That you could not demand that they go to this real expensive one that's linked to the United States. They can go to a local one that's far cheaper. In fact, it might even be covered by their own healthcare system, or at least far less costly. And that's the thing that ends up happening. And that's why when you start to get to this, you'll realize that what ends up happening is people are when people are free to move, people are free to invite whoever they want in their home, and that people are free to hire whoever they want, either here or domestically. What ends up happening is you're going to find out that it's a better system for everyone. Then when it comes down to jobs, is you're going to have basically companies hire the best candidate, and people could get jobs elsewhere that are in this country, and they're not worried about, oh my god, my country's going to want me back and so much time, and I have to keep going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and that they have to deal with this garbage. And you would no longer have to deal with that, and that's something in which is a major issue. And I think that we need to view that in such a light that it's a lot different than, let's say, for instance, dealing with our current system in which we're highly restricted because our current system is basically where both sides want restrictions for their own current needs of both the Democratic and Republican parties. Now, if you have free movement and if you're actually a free individual, you should not have these problems. You should be able to marry who you want. You should be able to go where you want without the government restricting you. And the fact is, because there's a lot of money that goes around that basically would be pulled out. Obviously, the government would have to basically be smart about how they do things. Basically, the everything would be done in a lot more orderly of a manner, and things would be massively cut from the government, and the government doesn't want that because essentially the government couldn't rely on people staying here because they're locked in their country. And as I say with it, that's why the idea of a southern wall, and the reason why they're not doing a northern wall with it is because it's just the natural progress of people. You can basically all you have to do is look at uh, population density by countries. you're going to look at some of these things in which you're going to be looking at where they are: Bahrain, Malta, Maldives, Bermuda, St. Martin, Bangladesh, Vatican City, Jersey, Palestine, Guernsey, Mayonnaise, Lebanon, Barbados, St. Martin de France, one, Taiwan, I think it's called, Aruba. So these are like within the top 10, labeled in the top 10 if you start to look at where they are located wise. Let's see where they are. Let's see if I can find. And if you see its location, you can see it's far south on it. It's and then when you start to go up to the next one, we have Monaco. Monaco, right there in the Mediterranean. It's that's about 43 degrees north. That's probably going to be your coldest area. Singapore, 1 degree north. Hong Kong, it doesn't say, but they're real far south on. So let's go past Hong Kong, Gibraltar. That's going on. That's actually south of Spain. Bahrain. That's 26 degrees north. So if you start to go with these, this is getting further closer uh, to the equator. About 35 degrees north, about from Malta, Maldives. That's like 4 degrees north. Bermuda, that's like 32 degrees north. St. Martin, this is from the Netherlands. That's 18 degrees north. So when you start to getting around there, what you can see is going to be far warmer. The closer you get to the equator, you end up getting uh, far warmer with it when we get this population density. And this is where is it that this is basically a point of what ends up happening. And population density is one of those things that is very, very crucial into understanding what ends up happening with your that should give you a little bit of a clue of where people are actually going and uh, what ends up happening with uh, your immigration with it. So people think that uh, if you want to understand why we're putting the border on the south, this is why. Because people are going to be more apt to move away toward the equator than away from it when they actually travel away from the U.S. They're not going to be apt to move away. They're not going to be apt to move away from warmer weather. People just naturally move there with it. If you look at the population toward the equator, or uh, or toward the poles, with it, the poles definitely do not get the population. I mean, you could look at the population density of Canada next to population density of Mexico. You're going to find a higher population. If you look at, you can just look at game shows, for instance. Game shows do not give trips. They're not giving as many trips out to Canada as they do to Mexico. If Mexico was so undesirable a place to go to, they would not be giving away trips to it. And you're finding at least uh, several times a week, and I can guarantee once a show with it. When you get a lot of these game shows, they're giving away trips to Mexico. They're not giving away. They're very rarely giving away trips to Canada because people don't like cold. People do not tend to like to vacation in cold weather. This is not what they do. So the way people migrate uh, when they do in larger groups, they actually migrate toward warmer weather. They don't migrate toward colder weather. You can actually look at that when we start to look at areas of your least dense states. You find a lot of density when you go out to uh, areas when you start to go further south. And even though you might find certain states with it because of culture with it, they're not as dense. That's only because of the culture that they brought with them, and it's not because of their weather. It's because of culture, and it's because of lack of the development. If you're a developed state in the United States, you are going to get people. You are going to get a huge population of people. You're going to have. You're apt to have very, very highly developed cities. If you're in the north, and if you're farther away from warm weather, you're less likely because it becomes a high risk to areas to basically getting people to be functional when you have cold weather going about. Cold weather is a very, very bad thing for developing areas because it means you're spending a lot more money on getting rid of things like ice and snow. Trust me, there's ice and snow out here with it. And you end up finding a lot of areas, specifically in those states, that you're going to find that are just blank and open. And in a lot of these states, they might have a couple of big cities, but outside of those, it's going to be a lot of barren area. And you're probably going to have a lot of rural areas out there. But in those, when you go further south with it, you're going to find a lot of them. Why do you think Texas is so developed? Texas has a lot of major cities. even though it's large, but you compare that to Alaska. Texas is tiny next to Alaska. I mean, yes, it's the third largest, and yet you look at Alaska, and it has a population of less than 1 million people. I mean, you look at that's due to the effects of cold. It's basically, if you actually and when you do that, you're just not going to have development. There's a couple of things that actually do with development. Number one is when basically you have a cultural thing with people that don't want to develop. That's why you find these broken down cities. And I think we need to talk about that as well. There's people that just don't want that just don't want new business, and they don't want people that don't look like them. And that's why you find these cities like in Ohio and West Virginia and some of these other cities, some of these other places that end up becoming virtual ghost towns because like we don't want people that don't look like us. You know, they'll start up businesses and hire everyone. So once the major business leaves, because of all the regulation that end up all the regulation and taxation that was solely relied upon them, once they leave, guess what's going to happen? There's nothing there. And they're like, well, how come our town's all broken down? Well, because you were relying on that one business for taxation and they got sick of it because you wouldn't allow any other businesses in the area. And they try to they go, oh, we want the government to come in and save us. We want the government to bring in all these other bring in these jobs back. The jobs ain't coming back, and it's because of your own damn faults. And this was it boils down to because you get these people who are anti-immigrant and they would so stuck in their old union ways, and they want to basically force these people to basically force the government to bail these cities out. The government has no right to bail these cities out. These people basically made their own graves in their own city in these cities, and that's the reason why. You're costing me more and more money in taxation because I have to support all these other things in town. uh, I'm not going to stick around any longer. And what they're going to do, and basically what the government tries to do, the government comes in and basically pumps in a huge bunch of money, which ends up working out to basically a lot of times being like $1 billion per employee, which is asinine. And the whole country has to pay for that. And that's not right. And we find that with like the carrier plant, I forgot what town in Ohio with it that Trump did. He goes, I saved the carrier plant. Yeah, for the same price with it, you could have for 1/10 of the price, you could have actually sent uh, all the people in the plant to get basically a doctorate degree at pretty much any college in the nation except for Ivy League for basically for about or I would say for about 1/10 of the cost, for about like 1/100th of the cost, you could have gotten them like a doctorate degree at any state college, and that's what could have happened with these people. And this shows you basically that it wasn't about that; it was a basis about buying votes with it and wasting countless amounts of money. And this shows you that there was no actual care about that, and that you know that this is going to go temporary. That's basically just going to go for a few years, and then you're back to square one. And if they would actually done a solution like actually I don't know going at basically about 1% of that and actually saying we'll send you to these state colleges and get you a PhD, uh, buy you all the way through with you a PhD. That's far better uses of the money, and it's using 1% of that money where the people have been far happier with that. You basically let the plant leave, let the plant go overseas, and instead of actually wasting your money with it, you're actually taking money and you're actually going and getting these people an actual education where they actually can be something functional. They can go back to their city and they actually can open something up and they actually can be something productive. and maybe they actually can open up some, maybe they actually open and expand their city instead of just basically trying to kick the can along the road. And that's all this solution is, kicking the can along the road. And it still boils down to the whole immigration argument. And this is what this is what the restrictionists basically end up doing is they have all their towns fail because of this. They basically want to go back to coal. They want to keep going with coal powered power plants. Coal powered power plants don't work. They're inefficient. They're not quite as inefficient as something like solar power or hydroelectric or such things as wind turbines, but they are very, very inefficient. And whenever somebody mentions the idea of nuclear power, everybody starts freaking out. You have people on the right, people on the left. People on the right, they want their big cash cow being coal power. People on the left, they want their solar, their hydroelectric, and their wind. And the fact is nuclear power is safe. Basically, the first round of waste is actually recycled in the system. Second round of waste is actually used in nuclear medicine. There is nothing that's harmful in the system. They've actually created new turbines that are actually done. New turbines for the nuclear power system that are actually made by uh, Rolls Royce. They're actually used. They're actually far smaller, a very very small footprint. That these plants can be far smaller than even the coal power plants, and that basically they could be about a fifth of the size of a coal powered power plant, and that basically they could take up a smaller area, and basically they're not giving up any pollution. They're actually it's another type of green energy, and that nobody wants to go with it because they've been scared by either what they watch The Simpsons or basically what they've seen in communist countries. And this is basically what it comes down to, and then nobody wants to do it with it. Yet it creates high-paying jobs. It keeps all your maintenance people that are working on the power lines. Every one of those stay. All your people that and it creates high paying jobs in the actual nuclear plant because you need a master's degree or better. It then so it creates those high paying jobs right there, and then when it comes down to the consumer has something that's far cheaper. Now, this is something that boils into this immigration argument. Now we can actually start going with something cheaper, and we can actually start saving these towns if they're willing to accept modern solutions. But they're not looking for modern solutions. They're looking to basically go back into the 1930s, into or what they dreamed that the 1930s were. They don't understand that the 1930s was hell. The 1930s was the Depression era. They think the 1930s was something great because there was immigration restrictions, and that they didn't have to compete with any of these other people, and that basically there was the minimum wage laws that actually restricted blacks from being able to compete from white union workers. So they thought that was great. So they think the 1930s were the greatest time ever, and this is the whole point. And they want to go back to that era. That's why you find all these people, all these MAGA MAGA uh, adherents. Basically, they're all the ones that basically loved FDR. Meanwhile, FDR ruined the damn country. And the fact is that's why they're all immigration restrictionists and all these other things. But restricting immigration will only destroy the country further. We have our data in the last for the last 3 months of 2020. We saw that the job numbers were completely flat. We saw the job numbers before then were basically just people going back to work. That's it. There was actually since the actual restrictions on immigration were put, there actually was no growth in jobs. Dead last, zero, zip, nada. What the president actually did was actually cut jobs. In fact, When you cut immigration, you cut jobs. This actually creates more poverty. That's what the president did. So anybody who says, "Oh, the president was so good on jobs," but no, guess what? Create poverty. For those who thought that, oh, he reduced the amount of illegal years that we have, 17, 18, and 19, guess what? That was the same numbers as George W. Bush, same numbers as, guess what? Barack Hussein Obama. No difference in numbers. We don't have 2020, but I can guarantee you on those numbers, they're going to be worse. Basically border security on the south, border security on the north, uh, and then a basic border security when it comes down to the plains. Basically, you let anybody in. You get a check, health check, and passport. That's it. Nothing more. No interviews, no nothing. You let them come right in. That's all you need. And basically, you let them come right in. And people are like, oh, but what about American jobs? Doesn't matter. You want the best candidate for the job. The only thing that matters in the economy is the business selling to other businesses and the business selling to the consumer. You want the consumer to get the best price. The economy becomes more efficient is by the business hiring the most efficient workers in the economy. That's it. I know it's probably going to piss off a lot of people. That's basically the solution. And I know that that's probably going to make a lot of people mad, but that's how things work. And there should not be any worry about workers. And the economy doesn't worry about workers. The economy only worries about the business, the consumer. And that's just how things work out there. It's just sorry to tell you, but the consumer, the actual worker doesn't matter. That's actually an idea of Marxism. If you want to prescribe the Marxism, then go with Marxism. I mean, there's plenty of people out there that will actually tell you about Marxism out there. If you want to go with ideas of actually looking for the best option for solutions for capitalism, you need to understand capitalism is the business selling to business, business selling to consumer. That's it. And efficiency happens when you hire the most efficient worker. Simple as that. I'm going to end it right here, and that's about it. And bye, everyone.